Sage Dynamics. This video we're going to talk a little bit about rifle configurations for night vision use. Stand by for some information which is based largely on my opinion, which is based on my experience of using rifles for low light, specifically with night vision. What we're talking about is a rifle configured for the use of a night vision aiming device, an IR laser of some sort. We'll talk about 3 popular variants of those in the rifles that I use. The whole premise, I guess, of this video is because I get a lot of questions about it. Obviously, I teach a night vision fundamental level class. I don't teach really anything open enrollment above fundamental level for night vision for a number of reasons. But it's something that gets covered in the class, and it's also something I get questions about. And even in rifle classes that are just low light in nature, no night vision, or just traditional defensive rifle where everything's taking place during the daytime, a lot of questions come up with the priority of placement on accessories when it comes to rifles. Now, there is one sacred cow that may get slaughtered in the process of this video, so just bear down and prepare yourself for that eventuality, and if you fall into the camp of that sacred cow, you'll know it when we get to it. So this is pretty much my go-to night vision gun at the moment. PWS Mark 111 Mod 2, which has an 11-inch barrel. You're looking at a 9.5 inch-ish rail. And I'm using the B.E. Myers Mall C1 Plus, which I'll have a video on in the near future. I've been using it for about a year. I'm very, very happy with it. If you'll notice, it doesn't really affect accessory placement. I've got my night vision device, I've got my front sight, got my optic, got my rear sight. Now, in this configuration, even on this SBR, I have 4 methods of aiming. I've got iron sights, I've got visible red dot optic, I've got an IR laser, and I've got a visible green laser. The Mall comes with the green laser. That's 4 different ways to shoot accurately, knowledgeably, putting rounds exactly where I want them. At what point is methods of aiming too high? Consider the fact that on SBRs, you generally have very, very minimal rail space unless you're using a device, with a purpose-built device to give you back your iron sights. But if we think of the rifle like the island, the first thing I'm going to vote off the island when it comes to night vision guns are the iron sights. If I don't have room for them, they don't get put on. That doesn't matter what length the rifle is. My priorities of setting up the rifle are going to be the IR laser, visible laser, my white light, because again, the rifle's set up for night vision, but that means it's probably going to be dark wherever I'm going to be, so white light may be needed depending on the context of the situation or if things break. Then I've got the pressure pad for my light source, my activation method if I'm not using just a thumb click on the back of a flashlight. Then I've got my visible optic. If for some reason there's no room for this front sight, which the Mall you don't really have to worry about because of the way it's designed, this is going to get voted off the island. And if I don't have room for this, then there's no reason to have this. Or I'm going to take this front sight and I'm going to move it back to here. So even though it compresses my sight radius greatly, I would at least still have those iron sights in the possible situation where the optic failed, the IR failed, the visible laser failed. Then I can flip up my iron sights, which at that point we're getting close to fantasy land. The chances of all those devices going down or all those methods of aiming going down at the same time are pretty infinitesimal. I don't know of any single case where that's ever actually happened. I'm sure it has. I'm sure somewhere out there there's an exception to the rule. I personally don't know of one. And in that situation, I feel like that person would probably have another method or another weapon system to use, such as a handgun, or maybe they had their iron sights and they flipped them up and they were able to finish the job. I don't know for certain, but I'd say if a situation has ever taken place where the optic has failed, visible and the IR laser have failed, probably the exception that proves the rule, more or less. This is another example of an SBR, a little bit different configuration. This time we're looking at D-balls. This is the D-ball, the I2. As you can see, I've got my IR and visible laser aiming device. This particular unit does not have an illuminator, so I'm using a Surefire V-Series Scout, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but then here's my activation method. And I have my visible optic and my rear sight. The only reason I have a rear sight on this gun is because of the Leaf, a product that I developed in cooperation with Railscales. It gives me a front sight, if you're not familiar with this device, front sight height for a 5200-0. There's a video on the channel about that. It'll get you all in the nuts and bolts of it if you're already asking questions about how you adjust the elevation and things like that. You don't have to. Go watch that video if you're curious about the Leaf specifically, if you're not familiar with it. If this didn't exist, then I wouldn't have backup sights on this gun because there's just no room for them. I could technically put a front sight here behind this dual pressure pad that I use to activate the laser device and the light, but that sight radius is so extremely reduced, and again it goes back to what are the chances of all three aiming systems going down at once, and I'm going to need those iron sights. If some cataclysmic event were to take place and I were to lose this, and I were to lose the visible and the IR, then I probably lost my white light, which means my iron sights might not do me any good anyway, depending on the environment that I'm in. Again, we're getting closer and closer to Fantasyland when we talk about all these different systems failing at once. I know there's a lot of hardliners out there that believe that iron sights are 100% necessary, but those guys are usually in the camp of dudes who don't run a lot of night vision anyway, and if they do, they've probably come to the conclusion that at least on shorter guns, the iron sights can get voted off the island, or at least move to the quaduciary, I guess, position of importance. This is more of a full-size rifle, 14.5 inch pinned with a Dragon muzzle device, and we'll talk specifically about muzzle devices towards the end of the video. Again, the only reason that I have iron sights on this gun is because I'm running a Leaf on top of, this time it's the D-Ball A3, their current generation of IR visible laser, and it has a built-in illuminator. Because it has a built-in illuminator, and I'm comfortable with the illuminator's performance out to reasonable distances, I'm running just a traditional scout light on this rifle. If I had an HLX, I would probably have that until the new generation of Scouts come out. The HLX is where it's at for white light because it's 1,000 lumens and a buttload of candela for rifle purposes. Pressure pads back here. Rail mounting position, something we'll talk about, the priority of things. But I just wanted to give you another example of more of a full-size rifle. Those of you running 14.5 pinned or even 16-inch guns, this is closer to the configuration you're going to have. Now, you guys running the longer rifles, you have more rail space available to you. So and usually the point of contention is laser placement versus iron sight placement. My feeling is this: the rifle is for night vision, for low light. So those iron sights, again, they get voted back down or completely off the island. In this case, you still have room for them if you wanted to. So if I didn't have this Leaf, couldn't I just mount my front sight up here? Right there in front. I got enough room for it. This particular unit is set just a little bit back because I'm using the manual button, the manual fire button versus a pressure pad activation. Yes, you could put a front sight up there. In fact, you could mount it backwards so it folds to the front, which is something you want to do. Some people, they look at that kind of weird, but just remember the front sight works from either side. You just got to remember zeroing that you got to go the opposite direction if you are going to mount it that way. There's some questions of durability. I get it. Again, we're getting closer to Fantasyland when we start talking about stuff like that. But yes, there technically would be room for a front sight on this rifle. What about mounting it to the rear of the visible optic? You could, but then it gets into contact with my light source, my light pad, my light activation pad. If this pad wasn't here, it'd been fine. I'd put it right behind here. I do not like to mount any of my accessories beyond my laser device because I'm worried about reflection and divergence depending on the nature of the device. I don't want my illuminator reflecting off my flashlight, my front sight, anything I've got mounted up there. And I certainly don't want my laser making contact with any of my accessories beyond. So the laser, to me, no matter the rifle, always gets first placement priority towards the end of the rail. Last example I brought with me today for this video, 14.5 inch pinned gun. This is the agency rifle, very unicorn these days because they don't make them anymore. They only made about 300 of them, so I'm pretty honored to have one. Beside the point, I'm running a PEC 15 on this. This is full power PEC 15, the unicorn black ones, which were limited production. So if you can find a black PEC, grab it because they're super rare. As you can see, PEC has first rail placement priority, then I have my light control pressure pad, and then, look at that, there is my backup sights. If I'm going to leave them on the gun, and this is the configuration I'm going to have to use, then that's where that front sight's going to go. I'm not going to give it priority placement over my laser or my light source, because again, the primary purpose for the rifle is night vision. Night vision / low light. So night vision takes priority. Secondary position is going to be my white light, because if I'm using night vision, I might have to use white light. I've got my visible optic, and then I've got my backup iron sights in the event that 1, 2, 3 systems fail. Or 1, 2, depending on how you want to look at it. We've got 4 methods of aiming on this rifle. Iron sights are still important if you have room for them. However, they have less importance to me than the main purpose of the rifle itself. If I was just setting a rifle up for daytime or daytime / low light use, it'd be a different conversation, because I probably wouldn't even have a night vision device on the gun itself. That's kind of that sacred cow. The iron sight placement is always going to be a point of contention. I'm sure I'm going to get downvotes just based off of that. But again, we're getting super close to the gates of fantasy camp when we start talking about all these other systems failing and me suddenly needing my iron sights. Can that happen? Yes, it's on the list of things that can happen. However, it's pretty damn close to the bottom. Question to answer: why does the laser take priority towards the end of the rail? Most people understand that the rail is stronger the closer you get to the front of the gun, or I should say the receiver. And you're absolutely correct. Some rails have reinforced trunnions with night vision use in mind. The Geisley rails are a perfect example of that. A lot of rifles out there are starting to become have more and more robust trunnions, so there's less possible rail flex that can be introduced into the gun. Every night vision gun I use, I've done purposeful hang weights off of them, see if it causes a significant amount of force to where it can actually diverge the beam from where I'm actually wanting to shoot. But then the argument goes back to, where do people put their iron sights? Usually on the end of the rail, where the same thing can happen. So it's kind of an interesting bit of cognitive dissonance when it comes into mounting advice, lasers versus front iron sights. But I digress. That would be a separate conversation. I'm going to put it priority here. If I mounted it back here, yeah, the rail itself is going to be arguably more stable back closer to the trunnion, closer to the receiver. However, goes back to that beam and illuminator divergence and reflection off of my accessories. If I mounted this laser back here, pushed my front sight out there, left my white light activation in front of the laser, if you think about it, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Now I've got all these different terrain features, if you will, that my laser could potentially come into contact with. Yes, the laser is going to clear them. The illuminator might not. And even if the laser clears them, all lasers have a degree of divergence. The further you get away from the source of the device, the emitter, if you will, the wider the beam gets. I can still have a little bit of photonic scatter, depending on the quality of the laser, bouncing off of the rifle itself, even the rail space. So laser gets priority seating closer to the muzzle itself. Everything else kind of falls in line behind that, as I've already explained. Laser, white light source. Obviously the optic isn't really going to have to interact with that stuff too much in regards to mounting priority. And then iron sights, if I can put them on the gun, they're going to be fourth in line in order of importance. Muzzle devices is another night vision specific thing that comes up. Do you need a flash hider? Not necessarily. There are some comp brake hybrids out there that aren't too bad for use in night vision. That being said, my favorite night vision muzzle device is a suppressor, followed right behind by a flash hider. I use dead air on my go-to gun, that Mark 111 Mod 2 that I showed you. Uses as dead air can. I have a dead air flash hider on it. I've used a Lantac Dragon. It's not that bad on a longer gun. Now you take that Dragon and you put it on like a 10-inch SBR, you might be auto-gating your nods and basically stealing your vision from you every time you press that trigger. It's not like muzzle flash, because muzzle flash, depending on the powder burn and the intensity of the muzzle flash, you may still be able to see, especially if you're using white light. Under night vision, if you get a bright enough flash, you lose everything for the speed of light, if you will, for the period that light takes, and for the night vision to readjust itself or auto-gate out of that extreme exposure to bright light. So my personal advice is, if you're going to run a dedicated night vision gun, suppress it. If you can't suppress it, put a flash hider on it. If you can't put a flash hider on it, find the tamest comp/brake you can. And also keep in mind that the shorter the gun is, generally speaking, and of course ammo plays a factor in this as well, the more muzzle flash you're going to produce. So you might end up getting a device, going out shooting with it under night vision and being like, oh, I shouldn't have done this. Last thing we'll talk about real quick is the pistol caliber carbine / SMG. This is B&T's APC-9, my go-to SMG / PCC. Rail space, as you can see, is extremely limited. If you're going to shoot one of these as a pistol or SBR it, if you get an AR platform, your barrel length is going to be 10, 7, maybe even shorter than that, unless you go for a full 16-inch, which you don't see too much of, but they are out there. In that case, configuration will be just like you'd configure a rifle. Something like this. Which IR devices are really made for shorter rail spaces? Steiner makes the CQBL, which is a great device. It's designed to be mounted at the 12 or 3 o'clock, which lends itself very well to configuration of this gun. I've got my V-Light, and then I've got my CQBL. I'm able to activate my pressure pads from this side, or if I really wanted to, I could move my optic a little further back and mount them up top. I might have to put a riser on it. So for this particular rifle, just based on the way it shoots, a riser is a little bit uncomfortable because of the natural cheek weld, so I'm running them off the primary position for the support hand. Running with suppressor, not too big of a deal. Mounting priority for this is the 12, or not the 12, the 3 or the 9, because mounting it up top again, I'd run into the same problem. I'd have to get a riser, and depending on the configuration of your SMG/PCC, a riser might not work with the natural cheek weld of the rifle. Putting a riser on this, it just puts my neck up a little bit too high, creates some strain issues. Kind of a problem. And again, primary purpose of that would be night vision shooting, which you don't use a traditional cheek weld for, but I still want to be able to shoot this thing during the day, so my optic, my visible optic height needs to factor into that. Now, the other rifles I showed you, PEC-15, MAUL, and then the 2 versions of the D-ball, generally, MAUL excluded, of course, because of the way it's designed, PEC-15s and the D-balls are intended for 12 o'clock mounting. You can side mount 9-3. I've even seen a really weird 6 o'clock configuration once based on a particular need for that weapon system. You can side mount them, not that big of a deal. Steiner used to make a device called the OTAL, which is also really good for small footprint 3 or 9 o'clock position mounting. Unfortunately, I believe it's been discontinued, although I'm sure you can still find one out there. Bad thing about this, there's no built-in illuminator. It's just a visible laser and an IR laser, so a V-light is a must unless you're shooting in an urban situation or there's natural ambient light going around. You really do have to have some source of illuminator past a certain distance, or if there's very, very little natural illumination, starlight, moon, you're not going to be able to really see at all to actually guide your laser to what you want to hit in conditions like that without a IR light source. As with everything, trust but verify. If you're getting into night vision and you want to find a really good device to use, I'm a big believer in the MAUL. I'll do a MAUL specific video here soon. I kind of wanted to do an extended review of it, so I haven't done anything with it video-wise yet, except for the videos it has just naturally appeared in because I was using that rifle. D-ball makes a great product. However, for non-restricted devices, their illuminators are kind of lacking, so that's something you need to consider. Now, if it comes with a built-in illuminator for practical shooting distances, if you're 100 meters in for night vision uses, for most people that's going to be pretty reasonable. The built-in illuminator for the A3 is not bad at all. Just keep in mind that the illuminator quality isn't as precise, and it isn't married to the laser. It's got to be independently zeroed, just like on the PEC-15 and some of the other laser devices out there. So laser priority, if you're mounting it further back from the muzzle because, boy, you're like, I don't care what he says, I'm going to do it anyway because I like the way it feels, or I like the way it looks, or I want to have that front sight out further forward, or all this, any other possible nature configurations, and that's fine, because maybe you'll do it and you'll learn, like, okay, yeah, I don't like this, or maybe you'll be like, I can make it work, I'm just going to keep doing it because I'm stubborn. Or you just genuinely find that it just works better for you based on what you need the rifle for, which is also a very real possibility. And rail length is a factor. If you have a 7-inch gun, or 7-inch rail, not a whole lot you can do mounting-wise. You can only go so far forward, obviously. But please do yourself a favor and choose a quality IR/visible illuminator device. My recommendations: MAUL, the PEC-15, the civilian version, the non-restricted version of the PEC-15, the Adipol-C, not a big fan. The illuminator in that one's kind of crap. Of course, D-ball, the A3 is awesome. You can even get an older I2 and pair it up with a Surefire V. The only problem about the V-lights is you are giving up some of your white light in order to gain that IR spectrum light. And it is getting a little bit technical, I guess, but the IR spectrum light on the Surefire V-lights is in the 800 range. Which is pretty eye visible. Even in IR mode, you can see it if you're looking for it, which bothers some people. Something to check out for yourself. It all depends on what your night vision gun is for. But that's kind of my advice on just kind of basic building blocks for rifle configuration for night vision use. Through your own experimentation based on your rifle system and your needs, you may find that you do things slightly differently, and that is okay, because To me, it's just like a duty belt for law enforcement. Not everything is going to be positioned exactly the same place for everyone based on their range of motion or specifically what they're worried about, or maybe their job. Obviously, a canine cop might set his stuff up differently than a patrol guy, SWAT guy, guy who never leaves the station because he's got shiny stuff on his collar, things like that. So this is just advice. If you disagree with anything, that's fine. If there's any particular questions you have about anything I've talked about you'd like to see further explanation on, feel free to drop them in the comments section below. I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Night jiggle accordingly. Was that too fast? I just kind of compressed that all into like, I took two syllables out of it. A little bit about elemental P, rubber baby buggy bumpers. You think? A little bit about? Little bit about. Little bit about. I'm going to go with that one.